I never thought I'd be the kind of person writing one of these posts, but here I am, sitting in my apartment, wondering if I've turned into the villain of my own story. Here's the thing. For nearly 10 years, my entire life revolved around my family's business. I didn't just work there. I practically built the backbone of it. I poured in my nights, weekends, and even my social life. When my friends were out partying, I was knee-deep in spreadsheets, late-night calls with suppliers, and trying to fix systems that would have collapsed without me. And the wildest part? I wasn't even bitter about it back then. I believed in the dream. My parents had started the company from scratch, and they always told me one day it would be ours. That word, ours, kept me going. It wasn't just their legacy. It was supposed to be mine too. But then came the day that flipped everything upside down. I walked into what I thought was a routine Monday meeting, only to find my parents sitting stiffly, avoiding eye contact. My younger brother, let's call him Kyle, was slouched in the corner, smirking like he knew a secret. And then they said it, "We have to make cuts. You're too expensive to keep on right now." I laughed at first, thinking it was some sick joke. Me? Too expensive? I was the one who saved them money by catching mistakes, negotiating contracts, and running operations smoother than anyone else. Meanwhile, Kyle barely showed up on time, spent half the day scrolling through his phone, and treated clients like they were inconveniences instead of the reason we had paychecks. But no, it wasn't a joke. My own parents fired me. I remember sitting there, stunned, trying to process how the people who raised me could throw me out of something I had given my 20s to. They justified it by saying Kyle needed stability, and that I would find work anywhere with my skills. In other words, my loyalty and hard work didn't matter, but protecting my brother's ego did. I walked out of that office with a box of my things, shaking, humiliated. My so-called family business had chosen bloodline favoritism over actual competence. For months, I was a mess, angry, depressed, lost. I couldn't even drive past their office building without my stomach churning. But eventually, I picked myself up. I got recruited by one of their competitors. Ironically, a company my parents always trash-talked, and I started climbing the ladder there. And here's where the irony hits. Fast forward years later, and now I'm in an executive role at that very competitor. I have influence. I have power. I've built a reputation for being the guy who gets things done. And guess whose company is on the brink of collapse? Yep, my parents. Their once untouchable empire is bleeding money. Clients are leaving, employees are quitting, and the market has shifted in ways they clearly weren't prepared for. The same competitor I now work for has been circling like a shark, ready to buy them out. And I'm sitting right in the middle of those discussions. So here's the dilemma. I could intervene. I could speak up, offer solutions, maybe even negotiate a merger that leaves my parents with some dignity. They'd probably even welcome me back with open arms, pretending the past never happened. Or I could stay silent. I could let the process unfold naturally, which would almost certainly mean my competitor buys them out, and I would be the one leading the integration. The son they discarded, the too expensive employee, now holding their fate in my hands. And I can't lie, part of me wants to watch it all burn. But another part wonders if that makes me the asshole. After the initial shock wore off, I told myself I'd never set foot in that office again. But the universe has a twisted sense of humor because just a few weeks ago, I got an email from an old coworker. "Hey, just a heads up, your parents' company is in serious trouble. They might be reaching out to you soon." I almost laughed. Reaching out to me? After the way they treated me? Yeah, right. But sure enough, 2 days later, I got the call. It was my mom's voice on the other end, soft and hesitant, like she was afraid I wouldn't pick up. "Sweetheart," she said, we need your help." I swear I almost dropped my phone. Help? After they tossed me aside like I was disposable, they suddenly remembered I existed? Apparently, their financials were worse than I realized. Years of poor management, mostly because Kyle was promoted way beyond his capabilities, had left them with mounting debts and angry clients. Suppliers were pulling contracts, employees were leaving in droves, and the entire structure of the company was cracking. I let her talk, nodding silently, my mind racing. She ended with, "We know you've done really well at competitor name. We're so proud of you. Maybe you could guide us through this? Maybe even convince your company to back off a little?" That's when it hit me. She didn't just want my help. She wanted me to sabotage my own company's negotiations to save theirs. The irony was too much. Years ago, I begged them to let me help innovate, to modernize operations, to restructure things before the market changed. They ignored me, called me too cautious or paranoid. Kyle, of course, told them I was overcomplicating things, and they listened to him because it was easier. Now here they were, practically begging for the same ideas I offered back then for free. I told my mom I'd think about it, and hung up before she could start crying. But that call lit a fire under me. I started digging into the company's financials, just to see how bad it was. And wow, it was worse than anyone could have predicted. They were hemorrhaging money, and Kyle was still pulling a full salary plus bonuses. Bonuses? For what? Running the place into the ground? I could almost see the collapse happening in real time. My competitor's acquisition team was already in motion, and I was scheduled to sit in on some of the discussions. If things kept going the way they were, it wouldn't be long before the paperwork was signed, and my parents' business would be swallowed whole. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that day I was fired. The smug look on Kyle's face. The way my dad avoided eye contact as if he knew deep down it was wrong but didn't care enough to stop it. And now tables turned. Still, a part of me hesitated. Because despite everything, this was my family. The company wasn't just numbers on a page. It was my childhood. I remembered sitting in the office as a kid, doing homework at a desk while my parents worked late. I remembered the pride in their voices when they talked about building something for us. But that us died the day they chose Kyle over me. The real kicker came the following week, when I ran into Kyle himself. I hadn't seen him in years, but he showed up uninvited at a networking event, probably desperate for investors. He spotted me across the room, and instead of avoiding me like a normal person, he strutted right up with that same arrogant grin I remembered. Well, if it isn't the golden boy," he said. "Guess you're still doing mom and dad's dirty work." "Huh? They said they called you. Let me save you the trouble, don't bother. You'd probably just mess it up anyway, like you always did." I can't describe the rage I felt in that moment. This guy, the one who stayed while I was thrown out, was still acting like I was the screw-up? Like I hadn't outperformed him in every measurable way? That was the moment something in me snapped. I realized I wasn't just deciding whether to save a sinking business. I was deciding whether to let the people who betrayed me finally face the consequences of their own choices. And the more I thought about it, the more tempting it became to let the downfall play out, while I sat at the very table where the decision was made. The first official buyout meeting was surreal. I sat at the long conference table, surrounded by sharp-suited executives from my current company. Everyone was calm, clinical, detached. To them, this was just another acquisition, a chance to absorb a failing competitor at a bargain price. But for me, it was personal. As the financial analysts projected slides of debt graphs and dwindling revenue, I couldn't help but think back to the countless nights I begged my parents to invest in upgrades, to modernize. Every warning I'd ever given was now a bullet point on a PowerPoint presentation. Client attrition rate, 38% in the past 18 months. Supplier defaults due to unpaid invoices. Excessive executive compensation. Unsustainable. That last one hit hardest. Because I knew exactly who executive compensation meant. Kyle. The CFO sitting across from me smirked as he clicked through slides. Frankly, the company is a liability. We'll have leverage in negotiations. They're desperate. We can set the terms. And that was when my stomach dropped. Because I realized my parents weren't just losing their business. They were about to lose it on our terms. On my terms. That night, my dad called. I hadn't spoken to him in years. "Son," he started, voice gruff but uneasy. "I know things weren't handled well before, but we're family. We need you now. We can't survive without you. If you could just..." I cut him off. "You mean like the way you couldn't survive without Kyle?" There was silence on the line. Then he sighed. "He's still your brother. We were trying to protect him. By destroying me? I snapped. He didn't answer. The thing is, if my dad had sounded genuinely remorseful, maybe some part of me would have cracked. But he didn't. His tone wasn't apologetic, it was transactional. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry it backfired. And that stung even more than being fired. The following week, we had another meeting. This time, my parents themselves showed up. Walking into the conference room, they looked smaller than I remembered, almost fragile. My mom's hair had gone grayer. My dad's shoulders slumped. For a second, I almost felt pity. But then I saw Kyle trailing behind them, smug as ever, like he owned the place. The executives laid out the acquisition terms. My parents paled as the reality set in. They wouldn't just be selling the company. They'd be surrendering control, their legacy gone in an instant. And here's the kicker. I had a voice in whether we softened the terms or made them harsher. Everyone in the room knew it. My parents' eyes kept darting toward me, silently pleading. At one point, my mom actually whispered, "Please, help us." And Kyle? He leaned back in his chair, smirked and muttered under his breath. Told you he wouldn't be any use. That single sentence almost sealed their fate. Because in that moment, I realized Kyle hadn't learned a thing. My parents hadn't either. They were still clinging to the fantasy that I'd swoop in, fix everything, and then quietly fade back into the background while Kyle played air. But this time, I wasn't powerless. When the meeting adjourned, one of my company's VPs pulled me aside. "You've got history with them. We'll follow your lead. Do we play nice or do we squeeze?" I just stood there, torn. On one hand, part of me wanted to crush them, to finally let the weight of their choices come crashing down. On the other, a quiet voice whispered, "If you do this, there's no going back. You'll burn the bridge forever." And maybe that was exactly what I wanted. After that meeting, things spiraled quickly. Word got out in the industry that my parents' company was circling the drain, and suddenly everyone wanted a piece. Competitors smelled blood. Investors were circling like vultures, and employees were jumping ship in droves. But the real chaos came from Kyle. Apparently, in a desperate attempt to save face, he'd been making side deals with suppliers, terrible deals, that left the company even more exposed. One supplier emailed my team directly, practically begging us to take over their contract because Kyle had promised them impossible payment timelines. When I read through the emails, I almost couldn't believe it. He was making the same careless mistakes I used to warn him about, only now the stakes were 10 times higher. It was like watching a toddler try to drive a semi-truck. The next time we all met, Kyle showed up late, 30 minutes late, to one of the most important negotiation sessions of his life. And when he did arrive, he was wearing sunglasses indoors, sipping on some overpriced energy drink like he was strolling into a frat party. I could feel my jaw clench as he plopped down in the chair next to my dad, smirk plastered across his face. "So," he said, "let's cut to the chase. What's in this for us?" The room went silent. One of our lawyers raised an eyebrow. The VP leaned back, expression unreadable. My dad closed his eyes like he already regretted letting Kyle speak. I wanted to sink into the floor out of secondhand embarrassment. This was the guy they'd chosen over me? This was the future of the company? My mom tried to smooth it over, but the damage was done. Our side had the upper hand, and Kyle had just handed us even more leverage by making it painfully obvious they were desperate. After the meeting, I stepped outside to clear my head. My mom followed me. Her voice was shaky when she spoke. "We know we made mistakes. We shouldn't have treated you the way we did. But please, don't let the company die. This business, it's our family." I stared at her, stunned. For years, I had dreamed of hearing those words. An admission that they were wrong. An acknowledgement that what they did hurt me. But the timing was too convenient. If I hadn't been in a position of power, would she have said it? Or would she still be defending Kyle, calling me too expensive, telling me I'd land on my feet while they protected him? I asked her that point blank. She froze, couldn't answer, and that told me everything I needed to know. They weren't apologizing because they cared. They were apologizing because they were losing. That night I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept swinging back and forth like a pendulum. Part of me wanted to be merciless. After all, hadn't they been merciless with me? But another part of me wondered if I was crossing into cruelty, if letting the company die would haunt me for the rest of my life. Then, at 2 a.m., I got a text from an unknown number. It was Kyle. LMAO, can't believe Mom and Dad think you're gonna save us. You're still the same loser you've always been. When this all blows over, I'll be running the show, not you. Don't get any ideas. That was it. That was the moment the pendulum stopped swinging. Because if there was ever any part of me that doubted whether I was justified, Kyle's message killed it. If they wanted to protect him, fine. Let them sink with him. The next round of negotiations felt different. I walked into the boardroom not just as an observer, but as someone with weight. Everyone on my side of the table knew my history with the company on the chopping block. My voice wasn't just input, it was influence. The presentation that day was brutal. Our finance team projected the numbers on the big screen, line after line of red ink. Negative growth, missed targets, contracts in breach. It wasn't just a struggling company. It was a sinking ship with holes too big to patch. My parents sat across from me, pale and silent. My mom kept fiddling with her wedding ring, my dad sat stone-faced. And Kyle was still leaning back like this was some casual poker game he was destined to win. At one point, our lead negotiator said, "Given the liabilities, we'd only be willing to acquire at 30 cents on the dollar. Control would transfer immediately, and current leadership would be phased out." My mom gasped audibly. My dad's jaw tightened. And Kyle, God bless him, actually laughed. "That's insane," he scoffed. "We built this company from nothing. You can't just..." He turned to me suddenly, smirk painted on his face. "Back me up here. Tell them this is a joke." The entire room froze, eyes shifting toward me. And for the first time, I felt the weight of the moment. I wasn't the kid they fired anymore. I wasn't the too expensive employee they tossed aside. I was the one holding the knife, deciding how deep to cut. I took a breath and leaned forward. "No, Kyle, it's not a joke. This is what the company is worth now. If anything, they're being generous." The color drained from his face. My mom's lips parted, like she couldn't believe I'd said it. My dad looked away, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. After the meeting, my parents cornered me in the hallway. My mom's voice cracked as she whispered, "How could you say that? We're your family." I stared at her, trying to summon any guilt, any shame, but all I felt was a cold clarity. "You made your choice years ago," I said. "This is just the result." My dad finally spoke, low and bitter. "We gave everything to that company. Everything. And you'd really just stand by and let strangers take it from us?" I looked him dead in the eye. "You didn't give everything. I did. And you threw me away anyway." For once, he had no response. The next day, our team drafted the initial acquisition terms. My role wasn't just symbolic anymore. I was asked to review and approve key sections, including what would happen to leadership. One clause in particular stood out. Current executives may be offered transitional consulting contracts at the acquiring company's discretion. In other words, I could decide whether my parents and Kyle stayed involved at all, or were erased from the company overnight. I stared at the screen, my cursor blinking on that single clause, and realized the truth. Their future was literally in my hands. And the question wasn't could I end them, it was should I? The draft contract sat on my desk like a loaded weapon. All I had to do was mark a box. Keep them on as consultants or cut them loose completely. One keystroke could erase their decades-long presence in the company. Their names scrubbed from the letterhead, their offices emptied. And that power terrified me almost as much as it thrilled me. But before I could even decide, Kyle managed to light himself on fire. Literally the next day, I got a frantic call from one of our acquisition managers. "You won't believe this. Your brother tried to undercut the deal." Apparently, Kyle had reached out to another competitor, behind my parents' backs, behind everyone's backs, trying to stir up a bidding war. The problem? He had no leverage. He leaked sensitive internal documents, exaggerated numbers, and promised things he had no authority to promise. When the competitor fact-checked, they realized half of it was smoke and mirrors. Instead of saving the company, Kyle made them look even more desperate. Word spread fast. Within 48 hours, our lawyers had enough evidence to claim breach of good faith, which gave us grounds to slash the acquisition price even lower. When this news hit the table at the next meeting, my parents looked like they'd been punched in the gut. My mom turned to Kyle, voice trembling. "What did you do?" Kyle just shrugged. "I was trying to get us a better deal. You should be thanking me." My dad's face turned red. "You just destroyed what little bargaining power we had left." The room went silent as everyone realized the truth. Their golden son had single-handedly driven the knife in deeper. And then, for the first time in my life, I saw my parents' faith in Kyle crack. My mom's hands shook. My dad slumped back in his chair. It was like they finally saw him the way I always had, arrogant, careless, incapable. But here's the twist. Instead of finally apologizing, finally admitting they'd been wrong about me, they doubled down. After the meeting, my mom pulled me aside again. Her voice was hoarse. "Please, don't let this destroy us. I know Kyle made mistakes, but he's still your brother. Can't you convince your company to give us a second chance?" That was the breaking point. All those years of sacrifice. All the nights I stayed late while Kyle partied. All the times they dismissed my warnings, fired me, humiliated me, and now, even with evidence of his incompetence staring them in the face, they were still trying to shield him. Something inside me went cold. That night, I sat at my laptop staring at the draft contract again. My cursor hovered over the clause about transitional consulting. I imagined what it would look like if I struck it out. My parents walking out of their own building for the last time. Kyle, stripped of his cushy title, no more power to throw around. The entire legacy they'd chosen him to inherit gone. For years, I had fantasized about this moment. The justice of it. The symmetry. But staring at that screen, I asked myself, would this be justice or revenge? The difference mattered more than I wanted to admit. Because deep down, I knew that once I signed off, there was no going back. And for the first time, I started to wonder, if I destroyed them completely, would that make me any better than they had been to me? I spent the next few days in limbo. The contract draft sat in my inbox, untouched, while every phone call from my parents went unanswered. I kept telling myself I needed time to think, to weigh whether I was seeking justice or indulging in vengeance. But the truth? I already knew the answer. Every memory of being discarded, of hearing the words, "too expensive to keep," while Kyle sat smirking in the corner, came rushing back. And now those same people were calling me their last hope. It was almost poetic. Still, there was one thing that gnawed at me, my conscience. Was I really willing to torch the bridge completely? To leave them with nothing, when I knew I could soften the terms with a single email? That internal tug-of-war consumed me. And then Kyle decided to make the choice easier. It started with texts. Long rants, dripping with arrogance and venom. "You think you're hot shit just because you got lucky at some competitor's company? Newsflash. Mom and Dad still trust me more than you. You're just a bitter loser trying to get revenge. Everyone knows it." First, I ignored them. But then the messages turned darker. "You think they'll actually let you pull the trigger on this deal? You're just a pawn. When this is over, I'll still be the one running the show. You'll always be second best. That's why they chose me." The final straw was an email, not to me, but to my boss. Kyle had actually tried to smear me, claiming I was sabotaging negotiations for personal revenge. He even attached screenshots of texts, edited to make it look like I was bragging about destroying my parents' company. Amateur-level Photoshop, but enough to raise eyebrows. I got called into a meeting with the executive team. "Is there any truth to this?" my boss asked, sliding the printouts across the table. I laughed bitterly. "None. He's desperate. This is exactly the kind of stunt he's pulled his whole life." Thankfully, my reputation saved me. I'd spent years proving myself, and no sloppy smear job was going to erase that. My boss shook his head. "We trust you, but this confirms what we suspected. Your brother is reckless. If we move forward, we're cutting him out entirely. That should have felt like victory. Instead, I walked out of that meeting buzzing with adrenaline, my hands shaking, because Kyle wasn't just incompetent anymore, he was dangerous. And for the first time, I realized how far he'd go to keep his grip on power. The next day, I finally picked up when my parents called. My mom's voice cracked through the line. Please, you have to talk to them. Kyle made a mistake, but he's scared. He thinks you're trying to ruin him. I almost laughed. Thanks? But my dad cut in sharp and cold. If you have any decency left, you'll help us. Family comes first. Always. Family. That word again. The same word they'd used when they fired me. The same word they twisted into a weapon. A shield for Kyle's failures. And in that moment, the decision crystallized. I wasn't destroying my family. They'd destroyed themselves the day they chose favoritism over fairness. All I was doing now was refusing to save them from the consequences. The morning I signed off on the revised acquisition terms, I felt strangely calm. No shaking hands, no hesitation. Just a quiet certainty, like I'd been walking toward this moment for years. The document was blunt. Acquisition at 25 cents on the dollar. Immediate transfer of control. No transitional consulting contracts. Current leadership terminated upon closing. It was surgical, clean, final. Once I hit approve, the process accelerated. Lawyers drew up final paperwork. HR began drafting termination notices, and our transition team started planning integration. What had been abstract suddenly became real, and that's when my parents panicked. They requested an emergency meeting, not with the acquisition team, but with me. Just me. I agreed, partly out of morbid curiosity, partly because a small, foolish part of me wanted to hear them finally admit the truth. When I walked into the small side conference room, they were already there. My mom's eyes were red from crying, my dad's face pale and drawn. Kyle, of course, wasn't there. He'd stormed out earlier when told he'd have no seat at the next negotiation. My mom reached for my hand. I didn't take it. Please, she whispered. You can't let it end like this. This company, it's our life. It's your life. Don't you remember all the years we worked for this dream? Her voice cracked, and for a split second, I almost saw the mom I remembered from childhood. The one who told me we were building something together, who said it would all be ours someday. But then my dad spoke. His tone wasn't soft or pleading. It was bitter. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching us squirm. After everything we gave you. I laughed bitterly. Everything you gave me? You mean firing me in front of Kyle? Telling me I was too expensive while you kept him around to play pretend CEO. My mom flinched. My dad didn't answer. You think I want this? I continued. I begged you for years to change, to listen, to take the company seriously. You ignored me. You fired me. And now you want me to swoop in and save you like nothing happened? The silence in that room was deafening. Finally, my mom whispered, we were trying to protect him. He's not as strong as you. And there it was, the same excuse recycled one last time. I stood up, chair scraping loudly against the floor. Then let him live with the consequences. You made your choice. Now I've made mine. I walked out, leaving them stunned. The next week was a blur. Our acquisition team finalized everything, and suddenly I was sitting at the table for the official signing. A stack of documents sat between us, pens neatly arranged. My parents looked hollow, like shells of the confident business owners they used to be. My mom signed with trembling hands, my dad with clenched jaw. When it was done, they slid the papers across the table. That was it. The company that had defined my family for decades was gone. Swallowed up, absorbed, erased. And I was the one who had signed off on it. As I walked out of that building, I expected to feel triumphant, maybe even euphoric. Instead, I felt nothing. Just an eerie emptiness, like the final note of a song fading into silence. But that silence didn't last long, because Kyle wasn't done with me yet. The ink was barely dry on the acquisition papers when the storm hit. Kyle showed up at my apartment 2 nights later, pounding on the door like a maniac. When I didn't answer, He started yelling in the hallway loud enough for the neighbors to peek out. "You think this is over?" he screamed. "You think you can humiliate me and just walk away?" I finally opened the door, not because I wanted to see him, but because I didn't want the cops called. He shoved his way inside, eyes bloodshot, the stink of alcohol on his breath. "You ruined everything," he spat. "Mom and Dad are destroyed. The company's gone. And it's all because of you." I stared at him, stunned. "Because of me? Kyle, you were the one who tanked the company. You leaked documents, you scared off clients, you burned through cash like it was free. All I did was refuse to clean up your mess." But he didn't hear me. Or maybe he refused to. "You've always been jealous," he sneered. "You wanted to be the favorite, but guess what? They picked me. They'll always pick me. And now you've taken everything just to prove a point." I almost laughed. "Picked you?" He'd just lost them their life's work, and he was still clinging to that delusion? When I didn't respond, he shoved me in the chest. Hard. That was it. I told him to get out or I'd call the cops. For a second, I thought he was going to swing at me. His fists clenched, his jaw locked. But then he just spat on the floor, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. The silence that followed was deafening. The next day, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for days. "Your father won't leave the house," she said. "Kyle's been out drinking every night. We've lost everything and I don't know what to do." I wanted to feel sympathy. I really did. But all I felt was exhaustion. For years, I had carried the weight of their choices, their favoritism, their blind loyalty to Kyle. And now that it had finally collapsed, they wanted me to shoulder the emotional fallout too. I told her gently but firmly, "I can't fix this for you. Not anymore." There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "You've become so cold." Cold. That word sat with me all night. Was I cold? Or was I finally protecting myself the way they never protected me? In the days that followed, the fallout spread. Industry news outlets reported on the acquisition, and while most framed it as a strategic expansion by my company, the subtext was clear. My parents' business had failed. Clients, competitors, even former employees all knew the truth. And the whispers started. Some said I was ruthless, that I'd orchestrated the downfall to settle a personal grudge. Others said I was justified, that my parents had reaped what they sowed, and I'd simply refused to bail them out. For the first time, I became the story. And that's when the guilt finally hit me. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I realized I could never go back. There would be no reconciliation, no late-night family dinners, no future where we laughed about the old days. I had slammed that door shut, and now all that was left was the echo. The question haunting me now wasn't whether I'd done the right thing. It was whether I could live with the person I'd become. The weeks after the acquisition felt surreal. Every morning, I walked into an office that had once belonged to my parents. Their names still hung on the building, but the energy inside was completely different. Employees greeted me with cautious respect, knowing I was now in charge of the place they'd once run. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like walking through the ruins of a war I never asked for. My dad officially retired, though retired was just a polite word for defeated. I heard through mutual contacts that he rarely left the house. The man who once lived for the office now spent his days in silence, sitting in front of the TV with the volume off. My mom tried to reach out a few times, usually late at night. Her messages were a mix of sorrow and guilt. I wish things had been different. I never wanted it to end like this. Family should forgive. But whenever I considered replying, I remembered her words the day they fired me. "It's just business, you'll understand someday." Someday had come, and I understood. Kyle spiraled. He was blacklisted in the industry. Nobody wanted to touch him. Word travels fast, and his reputation was radioactive. Last I heard, he was bouncing between dead-end jobs, still blaming me for everything. And me? Professionally, I was thriving. The acquisition boosted our market share, and my team was finally getting the recognition they deserved. The competitor I once envied now trusted me to lead major projects, and doors that had been shut for years were opening wide. But personally, it was complicated. I'd wake up some nights with a pit in my stomach, wondering if I'd gone too far, if maybe I should have given them one last chance to make things right. But then I'd remember the humiliation of being fired by my own parents to cut costs, while my brother lounged in a corner office. I'd remember the years of being told to be the strong one, while Kyle was coddled and excused. I'd remember begging them to take responsibility, only to be dismissed like a child throwing a tantrum. And I'd remind myself, I didn't destroy the company. I just refused to save it. Now, every time I walk past that old nameplate on the building, I feel two things at once: grief and relief. Grief for the family I lost. Relief for the life I finally reclaimed. So here I am, writing this out to strangers on the internet, because the people closest to me are too biased to give me a straight answer. Did I go too far by letting their business collapse instead of stepping in to save it? Or was I justified after the way they treated me? AITA for letting my parents' company die after they fired me and chose my brother instead?